Today we are starting a brand new 10-week long series. So buckle up. We're going to be in this one for a minute. The series is called Dream to Destiny, and it's based on Pastor Robert's book by the same name, Dream to Destiny. He wrote the book originally in 2005 and then re-released it again last year with an updated. This is like, if the old one was the New King James version of the book, this one's like the NIV version. So it's been re-edited and some stuff added to it. And I actually was comparing, because I have the original that I bought many years ago. I was actually comparing. So a lot of it's been rewritten into a little bit easier to read, a little bit more modern. And so I'm actually going to give this one away in a minute to somebody if you want it. So we'll see if you want the book. Phil's like, yeah. Are you going to read it if I give it to you? Okay. There's a quiz. Whoever answers the question right in the quiz will get the book. So he taught this series, taught it a couple of times at Gateway, and we were at a pastor's conference, and he actually gave a bunch of us his notes to this series and said, please teach this in your churches. And so he said, I actually shared a reel this morning. It's kind of ironic and funny that he shared it this morning. He put a reel on Facebook and said, let me be your research assistant. Feel free to use my notes and make them your own. So anyway, this series is this book, when I read it back in probably 2011, this literally changed the direction of my life. If you can get this message over the next, it's not the next 10 weeks. We have some stuff planned in the middle of that. This will take us about 2 or 3 weeks past Easter. So we'll be in this one for a while. But if you can get this message of Dream to Destiny inside you, I promise you it'll change the trajectory of your life. And it's probably one of the most impactful teachings I've ever heard. I taught a prologue to this series at the end of our Back to Basics series. So if you missed that, you can go back and listen to, called Walking in the Will of God. And that's where I kind of set up the whole idea that God has a dream for your life, and that the dream from God is not the promise of God, it's what motivates us to do the will of God. Your dream from God is going to involve helping other people, and it's going to carry with it some great responsibilities. And with those responsibilities, it requires that we have strong character in order to walk in those responsibilities. And it's easy to get excited about the dream and not think about the character and the strengths that are needed or required in order to fulfill the dream. We can all get really excited about the dream that God has for us, but we don't get real excited about putting in the work to get ourselves ready to walk in that. And so the will of God for your life is the journey that takes you from dream to destiny. That's why with this graphic, I use the map. So the bottom, you're there at the dream. And if the goal is to get to the destiny, it's a journey to get there. And I want you to remember, we'll probably come back to it several times, the illustration I like to use of the hiker when you go on a hike with Jesus. And that every time he asks us to take something out of our bag is a test. And if we want to reach the top of the mountain, we need to learn to stay close to Jesus and to follow him as he leads us. And so each week over the next 10 weeks that we're in this series, we're going to look at one of the tests that we go through on our journey with the Lord. And if you haven't taken them, I suspect you've probably taken all 10 at some point in your life. But if you haven't taken them, you will. And if you failed them, you get to take them again. It's like you can just circle the mountain as many times as you want until you're ready to pass the test. And passing them is 100% up to us every single time. That's the good news. We get to control whether or not we pass each one of these tests. And so in this series, we are going to look at the life of Joseph. And so Joseph is one of Jacob's sons. He's Jacob's 11th son. I do need to correct, in the Walking in the Will of God message, I actually misspoke and said that Levi is the youngest son of Jacob. He's not, it's Benjamin. So I just completely messed that up. So anyway, if you want the book, I have a question for you. How old was Joseph when God gave him his dream? We'll do it Price is Right style, whoever's the closest without going over. Anybody?
I'm not giving you the answer.
17.
Miss K, you win. Will someone run this back to Miss K? Ashley got it. All right. So Joseph was 17 years old when he received his dream from God, and he stepped into his destiny when he was 30 years old. And there are some tests that he had to pass to get to his destiny, but we'll see in this series that some of the tests happened after he was 30 years old. And so what I'm saying is this is for everybody. It doesn't matter if you've already reached your destiny, there are still going to be tests because God's always giving us more responsibility and more things to do. And every time we get a promotion, every time we get more responsibility, we take the first test every single time. And the title of the message in the first test we take is called the Pride Test. The Pride Test. Let me pray and we will get into it. Lord, deal with our pride. Amen. Humble us. All right, let's read in Genesis chapter 37, verses 1 through 11. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah, the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Let's stay on this one for a second. You go back to verse 2. So, just some context. If you'll remember, Jacob had gone to stay with his father-in-law, and he had wanted to marry Rachel. And his father-in-law had made a deal with him that if you'll work for me for 7 years, I'll let you marry Rachel. And then he pulled the bait and switch on him and said, well, actually, you've got to marry Leah first, because in our tradition, we have to marry off the oldest daughter first. So if you'll work for me, so marry Leah, and then you can work for 7 more years, and then you can marry Rachel. And so it's a pretty good deal for his father-in-law. He got 14 years of free labor out of Jacob in exchange for marrying his 2 daughters. But Leah had 6 sons, and then her servant Bilhah had 2, and then Zilpah was Rachel's maid, and she had 2 sons, and then finally at the very end, Rachel had 2 children, and the 2 children of Rachel were Joseph and Benjamin. So Joseph was the 11th son, Benjamin was the 12th son. And we know that, we're going to read in a second, in verse 3, we keep going, that Israel, who is Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. Some translations say a coat of many colors. Verse 4, when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. So how wise of Joseph to go to his bigger, stronger, older brothers that hated him and tell them this dream that he had. Verse 8, his brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? Like, you just read that. They're like, are you for real? Are you serious? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and the last part, what he had said. Verse 9, then he had another dream and he told it to his brothers. He goes back to them and says, hey, I had another one. Listen, I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon Sun and the moon represent his parents, and the 11 stars, or his 11 brothers, were bowing down to me. When he told his father as well, his brother, yeah, yeah. It's like when a diesel like overspeeds or something. I was watching a video the other day on some of these like tractors on tractor pulls. When those diesel engines get going, if they overspeed, like they just like burn until all the fuel's gone and like fire comes out. It's awesome. That's what just happened. Verse 10, when he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. And then just to show you where he steps into, he was 17, we read at the beginning when he got the dream. And he steps into his destiny. He was 30. Genesis 41, verse 46. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. And so Joseph was 17 years old when he gets the dream from God, and he was 30 when he stepped into his destiny. That's not a magic number. It's not just 13 years from dream to destiny. That's not a thing. But it took him 13 years to step into his dream and then to subsequently fulfill his destiny. His destiny wasn't just to work for Pharaoh. His destiny was to save all of Egypt and all of the surrounding areas when they went through the famine. And he fed multitudes, millions and millions of people he provided food for throughout 7 years of famine. And so you'll see these tests that will continue even after you get into your destiny. And you take them over and over again as we get more and more responsibility with every time you're promoted. So point number 1, God has a dream for you. God has a dream for you. All right, everybody's favorite Bible verse, Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans. I'm in a unique. It's gonna be a ride this morning, y'all. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future." And so God has a dream for every single person. He's got a plan for your life. He knew you all the days before you were written in the book of life, before one of them came to be. And God's dream for you is bigger and better than your dream for you. Like Pastor John said last week, if you have a dream that you think is from God and you're capable of doing it on your own, it's probably not from God. In other words, dream bigger. And so every person has a dream from God, and Joseph's dream was from God, we know. And every person has a destiny, something that God has set out for you to accomplish. And the sad thing is that most people live with the dream instead of in the destiny. You see, the dream, I've said already, but the dream is not the destiny. We don't just want to live with this dream that God has given us, something that we're going to do one day. We actually want to walk in the destiny that He's called us to walk in. And what I've learned is every time I get to what I think the destiny is, God moves the goalpost a little bit. There's a new thing. You get to, hey, I've arrived at if I could just camp out here, and then God's like, all right, cool, let's go to the next one. And you're like, wait a minute, I thought this is where we were trying to get to. And He is like, nope, we're still going. And every time we get to one of those destinations, there's a new set of character tests to get us ready to go to the next one. If you go back to the analogy of climbing a mountain, when you're climbing Mount Everest, or any mountain for that matter, they do that. They set up a base camp, and then they go up a little further, they set up another camp, and then they hang out there and acclimate for a little while. Then they make the next push. And it's all to eventually one day they make the summit and come right back down on those big mountain trips. But every time they go up a little ways, they hang out for a little while and let their body acclimate. And that's like taking a series of tests. And these character tests, there are character tests because your character supports your destiny. And the bigger you think your destiny is, the bigger the dream that you feel like God has called you to accomplish, the more tests there are. Because the stronger your character has to be in order to walk in those things. And God will absolutely not let you walk in your destiny if your character is not ready. Because He loves you and He cares about you and He doesn't want you to fail. And the good news is with God, we never really fail. That's why we set up a base camp. Because we can just keep taking that test over and over and over again until we pass it. You can circle that mountain as many times as you want. And so the first test is the pride test. And if you don't think you need to take the pride test, you just failed the pride test. So how can you know God's dream for your life, and how can you know the destiny for your life? Numbers chapter 12, verses 6 through 8 says, "Listen to my words when there is a prophet among you. I, the Lord, reveal myself in visions. I speak to them in dreams. But this is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house." Moses was a friend of God, and Jesus said, "I no longer call you servants, but friends." And so this applies to us too. Verse 8, "When I speak with him, I speak face to face, clearly and not in riddles. He sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses?" So when God speaks to Moses and when He speaks to us, He wants to speak face to face. The key to knowing the dream that God has for your life is to know God. Get to know the Creator, the one who gives you the dream. Get to know the one who can reveal it and will ultimately fulfill it. Psalms 103 verse 7 says, "He made His ways known to Moses, His deeds known to the people of Israel." You could say it this way, that Israel got to know what God did. Moses got to know why He did it. He made His acts known to Israel, but His ways known to Moses. And so get to know Him personally and build a personal relationship with Him, and He will share the dream that He has for your life with you. And one little caveat is that not every dream that you have comes from God.
Amen.
Pastor Robert says it this way: if you're over the age of 40, the Dallas Cowboys are not going to call you. No matter how bad you want them to. You can dream all you want. You can just sing an Aerosmith song and you'll be just fine. Just dream on. Y'all pray for the Cowboys today? The Packers coming to town. They need to handle some business. We need all the help we can get. Playoff time. All right, so number one, God has a dream for you. Number two, don't brag about it. Don't brag about it. So the dream was from God, but Joseph bragging about it, not from God. And this is the only test that Joseph took that he failed on the first time he took it. And that's why he ended up in next week's test, is the pit test. What do you do when you get thrown into a pit? And so his dream was from God, but he misinterpreted it. You see, he wasn't becoming a leader so that he could be served. He was being promoted and destined to lead so that he could serve other people. Have you ever wondered why God gave Joseph his dream? Maybe y'all didn't know how old he was when he got the dream, so maybe you haven't always wondered. But have you wondered in the last 10 minutes why God gave him the dream when he was 17 years old. Why so young? If he gave him the dream when he was 17 and he wasn't going to step into his destiny until he was 30, why did God give him the dream when he was 17? Right, because God knew that there was pride in his heart. And he knew that this test that he was going to go through was the best way to work that pride out of him. Joseph knew that he needed to be ready to step into his destiny by the time he was 30, and he knew that it was going to take 13 years to work that pride out of his heart. And he also knew that Joseph would brag about it to his brothers, and that would get him thrown into a pit and sold into slavery and ultimately thrown into prison. You see, we tend to make God's dreams about our kingdom instead of about his kingdom. His brothers hated him for his dreams and his words. They didn't just hate the fact that God gave him a dream. They hated the fact that he talked about it. They hated the way that he talked about himself. Have you ever met somebody who always talks about themselves and how great they are? Unless they're Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, it's annoying. The Rock is the people's champ. We don't talk about the people's champ like that. So Ashley and I were driving back from the bad place in Central Texas this week on Wednesday. We were driving home. We were listening to a podcast. Well, I should say I was listening to a podcast. Ashley was just a unfortunate bystander, I guess, innocent bystander listening to me listen to a podcast. And about 20 minutes into the podcast, she reached over and pauses on my phone and says, "This guy is so full of himself. He's just talked about himself for the last 20 minutes." And we do that. Like, we have to be careful. And I want to encourage you not to brag about what you're going to do. But people bragging about themselves and just talking about how great they are and how much they're going to do and all of that, that's a real turnoff. And so don't boast about your destiny or you'll never reach it. Don't brag about what you're going to do for God or what you've done for God, because it's really what God's done in you and through you. And so how can you know if you have a pride issue? Ask anyone you know that you trust. Because it's evident if you have a pride issue. You won't be able to hide it if you have a pride issue, no matter how bad you think you can hide it. You might say, "Well, you don't know my heart and what's inside." Oh, yes, I do. The Bible says in Matthew chapter 12, verse 34, "The mouth speaks what the heart is full of." The New King James says that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. If there is pride in your heart, it will absolutely come out. Because pride wants to be heard. Pride wants to give an opinion. I used to have a friend that I would every time I finished saying a sentence, would just have a need to inject an opinion. And I say used to have a friend because I don't put up with that. I don't need that kind of negativity in my life. Like, it's okay for me to finish a sentence and you not to have to tell me your opinion of what just happened. Pride always interrupts because its opinion is more important. I have to be careful. I'm ADD, so I have to say it before I forget it. But I had to learn that sometimes it's okay. You just don't have to say the thing that you're thinking. It's fine. Just let the other person talk.
Yes.
And so if we want to deal with pride in our life, we start with our tongue. Self-control is part of the fruit of the Spirit. There's not 9 fruits of the Spirit. There's 1 fruit of the Spirit, 9 parts. And self-control is the last one that we don't like to talk about. But it's up to us to actually do it. That's why it's called self-control. The Lord will help us. He'll give us the grace to do it. Grace is God's power. I'm all about grace. I love grace, but grace is the power of God to move in your life. Look what James chapter 3, verse 2 says. We all stumble in many ways, and this is the key. Anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. And so this is telling us that if we're able to control our tongue, we'll be able to control our whole body. The tongue is where you start. Your words matter. When I first started hearing a call from the Lord, it was many, many years ago, about pastoral ministry, and then it was confirmed by several pastors that I know. A couple of them you've met that have been on the platform up here that had prayed for me 10, 12 years ago about this call that the Lord had on my life for ministry. And I started thinking, well, I just need to get close to some people who are important. And what I really thought deep down is, well, if I can just get close enough to someone who's important, they're just going to see how awesome I am. And then I can start walking in the destiny that God has for me. Yeah. So after about a year of doing that, I spent a year basically volunteering full-time in ministry after college. And after a year of doing that, the Lord took me out of that season and sent me into the corporate world. Like the opposite direction of what I thought I was supposed to do with my life. And then I got called back I had been at Gateway Church. I was volunteering. I say it's right up the street. I was volunteering basically full-time in the youth ministry, and it met a lot of people through being a part of the ministry there for a while. And the Lord called me. I shared the story last week about how He called me back to the church plant that I'd been a part of to come be an assistant youth pastor, pastoring a group of like 25 high school students. So I went from a youth ministry, our high school ministry had like 700 kids in it, to a group with like 25 kids. And I was like, Lord, this is the wrong way. And then we had a church politics thing happen at that church, and our executive pastor and our youth pastor both left the church, and I took over as the youth pastor for the whole youth group. And when we had this big mess happen in the church, we had about 100 kids in total, and we lost down to, I call them kids, they're all like 25 and 30 now. But we had about half of them, and their families, leave the church over this big thing that had happened. And so I was leading this youth group, and while I was at youth camp, the new executive pastor that took over the role told the senior pastor that I had told, he just lied. He told the senior pastor that I had told him that I didn't want to be a youth pastor anymore. And so while I was at youth camp with my students, they went and hired another guy to be the youth pastor. And when I got back from youth camp, they took me to lunch and said, hey, since you don't want to be the youth pastor anymore, we hired this guy, and last week was your last week. And I was like, what? I didn't say that. And then a couple of years later, in 2014, I took a gig at another church as a sound guy. It's like I'm just progressively going further and further away from the pulpit. And you could look at that and be like, man, that's really messed up, and it was kind of messed up what happened, but the Lord knew that I needed to get some junk out of my heart. And at my last church that I was on staff at, for 3 years, I had a board member telling me in front of the senior pastor, almost weekly, well, you should preach more. You've got an anointing to preach. You should preach more. By then, I had pretty well learned the lesson God was teaching me, and I was like, nope. When God says preach, I'll preach. Until then, I am completely content to run sound and tech director stuff and run all the tech stuff. And I don't have any desire to try to take that. And it took a while. It took about 10 years to get me to that point. And I don't want to overblow things because we don't have millions of downloads on our podcasts or anything. But we started our podcast in April. We met with our launch team for about a year before the church launched, and most of y'all were here for a lot of that. But all those are on our podcast. But we actually launched the podcast in late April of this year, and I looked at it yesterday. And since April, it's had about 570 downloads, that's cool. But what was even cooler is I looked at where those are coming from. And it was in 9 different countries. And so our podcast is being listened to in the United States, Canada, India, Germany, Brazil, Ireland, South Africa, Nepal, Serbia, the United Kingdom, and in Sweden. And then I was like, well, I wonder about our website. I went and looked at our website analytics. Our website, since we launched it in middle of 2022, has had visitors from 79 countries. I was going to read some of them, but there's 79. Yeah. So if you can think of the country name, it's probably on the list. We've had people visit our website from every continent except for Antarctica. So if you know somebody going down to Antarctica, let me know when you get that in the analytics. So we have it but on 6 continents, people have come to our website and looked around on our website for at least a few seconds. And so I don't tell you that to brag. I just tell you that the Lord will steer you seemingly away from where He's called you, and then when you get your heart right, He'll actually take it and you'll do more than you ever thought that you could do. It blows my mind that there are people from 79 countries looking at our little ministry and what we're doing here in NRH with about 30 people. And it's incredible what you can do with technology these days. So we see Joseph was a tattletale even before he had the dream. He brought a bad report in verse 2 of Genesis 37. He brought a bad report before God ever gave him the dreams. He was a tattletale before God gave him the dream. But his destiny wasn't this idea of his family bowing down to him. That did end up happening, but that wasn't his destiny. His destiny was feeding multitudes. But if God had showed him feeding the multitudes, that wouldn't have brought the pride out. But if God showed him his brothers bowing down to him, that brought the pride out. So, is it possible that God knows that there's pride in your heart? If you're frustrated about not walking in your destiny yet, I don't know if anyone can relate, but if you're looking at where God has called you to go and you're not walking in it yet, and you're seeing other people that are walking in it, and if that's frustrating to you, is it possible that God knows that there's pride in your heart and He's trying to work it out? Maybe He's given you the big dream and now He's trying to work on humility. Pastor Robert said that the Lord told him one time, he asked if the Lord could teach him humility, or if the Lord could help him be humble. And the Lord said, I can't help you with that. You either is or you isn't. Humility is actually a command from the Lord in the Bible. It's not on the screen, but 1 Peter 5:6 says, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time." There's a command from the Lord that we have to humble ourselves before the Lord. And so God knew that Joseph would brag, and then he could prepare him for his destiny. And so if you're frustrated about not walking in your destiny and seeing other people that are walking in their destiny, what if it's actually God preparing you to walk in your destiny? And he's actually working on the pride that's in our hearts that we may not even know is there. Just ask somebody close to you. They'll tell you. All right. Point number 3, deal with the root of pride. So pride's a byproduct. Pride's not a root cause. Pride is a byproduct. And the root of pride is insecurity, often accompanied by inferiority or inadequacy. I'll say that again if you're taking notes. The root of pride is insecurity, often accompanied by inferiority or inadequacy. You see, deep down, what we all really want is to be accepted. Insecurity has to do with identity. It's ultimately the fear that other people won't accept us. And so we brag. We create a false persona. And we brag about our accomplishments and try to convince people that we're worthy of their acceptance. And our identity should rest in God and what he says about who we are, but our insecurity brings fear, and so we try to define our own identity. I don't want to offend anyone. I don't think I'll offend anyone in the room. But do you really think it's a coincidence that the movement in our culture that is surrounding identity is called pride? Our culture says you can be whoever and whatever you want to be, and you should be proud about it. I'll be a little bit firm for a second. That's a lie from the pit of hell. You don't get to define your identity. The Lord does. Pride simply says, I don't trust God or believe God has my best interest in mind, so I'm going to do it my way. Pride is the original sin, not Adam and Eve. Before that, Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12. How you have fallen from heaven, morning star. This is talking about Satan. How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, we saw that out of the heart the mouth speaks. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. Pride is the sin that Lucifer committed. And it was an appeal to pride that got Adam and Eve to fall in the garden. Genesis chapter 3, verse 5, Satan says, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes, the tree of life, or the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And he said, if you'll just eat from this tree, then you can be like God. To people who were made in God's image. King Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, warned us about pride in Proverbs 16, verse 18. Pride goes before destruction. a haughty spirit before a fall. Canaan, if you want to come. If pride is in your heart, then insecurity, inferiority, and inadequacy is in your soul. Our souls are our mind, our will, and our emotions. And so if you have pride in your heart, you'll have insecure, inferior, and inadequate thoughts, decisions, and feelings. If you feel inferior, you feel insecure, you feel inadequate, if you make decisions rooted in those things, well, if I can just get close to someone, then I can get myself promoted. Well, if I can just do that, if I could just do this, then I'll be happy. If I can just do that. If you're having those kind of conversations with yourself, it's ultimately rooted in pride, saying that I know what's best for me. And with every new level of responsibility, with every new position that you walk in, come new insecurities, inferiorities, and inadequacies. Remember when I was in the corporate world, when I was around a bunch of project managers, I felt like I was the man. And then I got promoted to being a director, and I walk in a room, and all of a sudden, everybody in there is an A player. You can start to feel inferior around people who, when you get into a new level of responsibility. So I want to close with an illustration that's at the end of the first chapter of the book. There's a story of this prince. This prince lives in a castle, and as he's looking out the window one day, he sees this beautiful woman walk by, and he says, I got to know this. I got to know this person. And so he goes undercover boss and changes his appearance, maybe grows a beard and disguises himself. And he goes out and lives amongst the people, and he meets this woman, and over a period of time, he wins her heart, and ultimately he proposes to her. And just before they're about to get married, he says, there's something you need to know about me. Because I'm actually the prince. And she loves him and has fallen for him, and so she forgives him for lying, and they go through with the marriage. And ultimately he becomes the king and she becomes the queen. Well, how does she deal with the insecurity of knowing that she came from nothing and now she's the queen? She doesn't fit in with all the other people you see in those cultures where, that sort of thing happens. Like, royalty only marries royalty. We just saw what happened with Meghan Markle. He married non-royalty, and they've basically been disowned by the royal family. She deals with the insecurity because she knows that she's married to the king. But she deals with the pride because she knows where she came from. You see, we're the young woman in the story. We weren't born into royalty, but Jesus fell in love with us, came down, became man in order to win our hearts back to Him. Knowing that I'm a child of the King will take care of my insecurity. If I can get my head around the fact that I'm a son or a daughter of the King of Kings. Like, I was just taken by that this morning when we were singing the Jesus is my healer, even the Holy Holy song, but the Jesus is my healer, that everything bows at His name. Every knee will bow, every tongue will confess. And if we can get our head around and really get an understanding and let the Lord work in our hearts in this area of identity, and we know that we're a son or a daughter of the King, that'll take care of the insecurity. But remembering where we came from deals with the pride. Remembering that we were adopted. See, your character is the foundation of your identity. Don't let your character be built on a foundation of pride. Humble yourself. Spend time with God and let Him show you who you really are. I was just listening to a thing this morning. It was this story of a grandpa who was always reading the Bible, and the grandson said, "Papa, you always listen to the Bible, and like, don't you know it yet?" And he was like, "Not yet." And he said, "Well, why do you keep reading the Bible?" And he said, "Well, go get that basket and the coal basket and run down to the creek and bring me back some water." So he goes and grabs a basket, runs down and grabs a pail of water, and comes back. And by the time he gets back, all the water's leaked out. He said, "You aren't running fast enough. Try again." So he runs again. All the water's gone before he gets back. It's a woven basket. It's not holding the water. Third time, he comes back, and the grandson's getting irritated at this point. And he said, "Why do I keep doing this?" And he said, "You notice anything about the basket?" And he looked down, and this basket that was once coal-stained had been cleaned. You see, read the Bible the same way. He said that it's not about how much of the Bible I've read, but it's how many times the Bible's been through me. That if we'll get the Word into us, it'll clean us. And so spend time with the Lord and let Him show you who you are. He'll help you understand the security you have as a son or a daughter of the King of Kings. And you'll pass the pride test. And when it's time, humble yourself before the mighty hand of God, and He'll raise you up in due time. If you'll humble yourself before the Lord, when it's time, He'll lift you up and move you forwards in the path towards your destiny. I want you to bow your heads and close your eyes. I want you to, like we do every week, I want you to ask the Lord, "Holy Spirit, what are you saying to me through this message today?" Is there pride in any area of my life? If you ask that question, get ready, He'll tell you. And I want to encourage you this morning to humble yourself before the Lord. Ask Him to help you control your tongue. Ask Him who He says that you are. Lord, I thank you that you're so gracious and that you love us enough to bring up to the surface the things in our heart that you want to deal with. And Lord, I pray that just like you refine gold, Lord, that as it goes through testing and through pressure, Lord, that the impurities rise up and can be scraped off. Lord, I pray that you would bring out the pride that's in our hearts that says that we know what we want, we know what we need, we know where we're headed, and we know how to get there. Lord, I pray that you would bring those things to the surface, Lord, and scrape them off. Lord, I pray that you would renew in our hearts a reliance on you as our identity. Lord, I pray that you would show us who you say that we are. Lord, I pray that you would reveal to us your heart. Reveal to us the dreams that you have for us, Lord. Reveal to us the things that you want to see us accomplish. Lord, motivate us to start walking towards the destiny that you have for us, Lord. And Lord, today we thank you, Lord. I agree with my brothers and sisters that we can walk in humility. And Lord, I just ask that you would help us navigate the pride test and help us pass the pride test so that we can move on in our journey towards our destiny. In Jesus' name, everybody said, amen.